So before winter retreat, a couple of us watched a documentary here together called Bending the Arc, which is about a nonprofit organization called Partners in Health, which is dedicated to bringing equal access to healthcare to the poorest parts of the world. And in the documentary, there's a scene at the beginning, I think, where you see Dr. Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health. He's graduated from medical school. He's just started a clinic in Haiti, raised funds and got support for that. The clinic has medicine, there's equipment, and he's trained staff as well. However, all these conditions have come together, but still 3 people in the catchment area of the clinic die of tuberculosis, and he is devastated. I mean, people should not be dying of tuberculosis in this day and age. It's a curable disease. So he calls his staff together and asks them, why did this happen? We seem to have all the conditions in place. What's going on? And as it turns out, the people from Haiti in that area were suspicious of Western medicine. They didn't understand that they had to take the TB medication over time to actually see the results. And so they stopped taking their medication regularly and then the illness got worse and then they died. So the solution that Partners in Health found was to have community health workers go from hut to hut, basically knocking on the doors of every single patient to check on them, to see if they were taking their medications regularly, but also to see if they had other issues in their lives that needed support, because we think it's so easy to just take medication every day in a part of the world where we have all our material resources. But this is a part of a world where they may not have running water, right? Where food is scarce. Yeah, so there's so many other factors that need to come together for people to take medication regularly. So these community health workers would go door to door, but most importantly, they would give people encouragement. And that was what helped them to take their medication and survive. And when I saw this, I was just so struck, you can have all the expertise, the money, the building, but that is not what saves lives. What saves lives is that human connection, the love, the compassion of one human being going door to door to connect with each and every single person to make sure that they stay on track with their healing. That really made me feel inspired to do retreat this year because it brought home the message that it's not about, getting all your ducks in a row in the external world, but it's the qualities of love and compassion that each of us embody as individuals. That's what heals other people and communities as well. And for me, it was so palpable when I saw the community health workers in the documentary themselves, so caring, so happy, so jovial. They just delighted in going to connect with each person in their community to make sure they were taking their medication. After I watched the documentary, then I was very much inspired to read Dr. Paul Farmer's latest book, which is called Fevers, Feuds, and Diamonds, Ebola and the Ravages of History. And that informed quite a bit of my retreat as well. So I thought today I'd share some of the highlights from that book and also the Dharma insights that it gave me. So the book is about the Ebola epidemic in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia that raged from 2014 to 2016. There were 28,000 cases and 11,000 people died. And the book is split into 3 parts. And the first part of it just details how Ebola spread in this part of the world and how Partners in Health came to be involved in helping on the ground. So that in itself is quite fascinating. If you've ever wanted to have a behind-the-scenes look of what it's like for these volunteer doctors to fly into a place they might never have lived in or have any idea what's going on. They just come in, deal with infrastructure that's not quite there and try and save lives. So that in itself I was quite inspired by. But what really touched me was to read the human interest stories in that section of the book. And what was heartbreaking was to read about how there were these 2 doctors who were leading the charge to do research and to treat people with Ebola, who themselves were trained in Sierra Leone and dedicated to taking care of the people there. Their names are Dr. Humar Khan and Dr. Martin Scalia. Both of them died in the process of dealing with the epidemic. And in really sad ways, they were denied treatment that was accessible to people from the West. So in the case of Dr. Humar Khan, he happened to be, I think, in the hospital where there were 3 vials of the experimental vaccine against Ebola. And there was this huge debate about whether or not to administer it to him. And they decided no. And then he died. And then shortly after, an American missionary gets Ebola, and they just fly the vials over to treat the American missionaries. Yeah. So that was one big debacle that really galvanized the medical community in Sierra Leone and the people as well to demand better care for their own people. And likewise with Dr. Martin Scalia, who was turned away from a British-run facility, but that said, that we have certain qualifications for treating people and you don't qualify. And so he was turned away, and eventually his friends in the US raised funds for him to be medically evacuated to the US, but by then it was too late, so he died in America. He was a green card holder, and his wife was a nurse in the US. Yeah, so just to see very starkly that your access to healthcare depends a lot on your nationality and the color of your skin. Because in that first part of the book, you can see the contrast when the US missionaries, or there was a US doctor who also got Ebola, and one of the partners in health volunteers, but to see the kind of treatment they received, immediately medically evacuated. The US CDC here, led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, with the full-scale team, all taking care of these people, and of course nursing them back to health over a very arduous period. So yeah, I think the contrast of those stories made the point very clear in the first part of the book. What's remarkable about the book too, though, is that there are 2 full chapters dedicated to the stories of 2 survivors in Sierra Leone. Because Dr. Paul Farmer is trained as an anthropologist as well, so he did these long interviews with them, and they had survived. One of the young men had lost, I think, almost 20 family members to the epidemic, and the other woman had lost her husband and her children. So it details their life stories, what they've lived through, and that whole process of falling sick and recovering. But here again, what was so inspiring was to see how it was love, compassion, and community that got them back on their feet. The story of the young man is about how he badgered Dr. Farmer to let him help survivors. The doctors were worried that he would get re-traumatized if he had to go back into the wards with people who had Ebola, but he just would not let up. And so that little chapter talks about how he saves the life of a 9-year-old girl who had lost hope. He was the only one who was able to talk to her and get her back, taking her medication, get her back to life. Yeah. So there's a great picture in the book of the young girl with her father, with full weight and back in recovery. And the same with the woman. Her name was Yabom. And what brought her out of depression was caring for orphans of Ebola. So they put her in charge of like a transition center where she cared for more than 80 kids. And eventually the Partners in Health found her a full-time job where she was caring for runaways and abandoned children. So just to see that it's not just about the biological healing part, right? So much of it is the emotional piece, and many of them suffered long-term results of the virus as well. So just to see that that's going to be the case with the COVID too, these long-term symptoms, people experience blindness from surviving Ebola. So, with every new virus, the doctors have to do all this research, and there's so much time and care that's needed to help people to recover. So that's the first part of the book. And then the middle part, to my surprise, and I think to many people's surprise, is actually a whole section on the history of colonial West Africa till today. And you're like, what does this have to do with an epidemic? Yeah, and in it, Dr. Farmer was trying to answer the question, like, why was it that in these 3 West African countries that had GDP growth that exceeded US and Europe in the last decade, why is it that these resource-rich, there are diamonds, there's rubber, there are all kinds of precious metals, why has not a single cent gone into public infrastructure and public healthcare? These countries are not lacking in resource and wealth, but none of it has gone to taking care of its own people. These areas are like considered medical deserts. You cannot get healthcare for, all kinds of ailments. So that's why you get this whole unbelievable chunk of the book dedicated to centuries of colonialism, neo-colonialism, corruption, war. There's no time to go into it in detail, but if you ever doubted that cyclic existence was horrific, I highly recommend this chapter. It was just, shocking what people do to each other, and a very stark reminder of like, wow, all these causes and conditions come together to build the situation where an epidemic can break out and there is just no access to proper healthcare and people die as a result. And I think that helps to lead up to the final section of the book, which is about how Ebola actually kills and the lessons learned. And to my great surprise, there's a little quote in that section that just says, "The microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything." And that's a quote from the scientist Louis Pasteur. Yeah. And so he's really trying to make the point that it's not the biology of a virus that kills. More than that, it's the social, cultural, and historical factors that shape what happened to communities, to individuals. And I see many nodding heads because that's exactly what we see right now, right? It's not about money and expertise. You can be in a country with the most incredible healthcare system, or at least the facilities available, and you can't get the epidemic under control. Yeah. So for me, it was a powerful teaching on dependent arising, just seeing how all these causes and conditions come together over centuries to ripen in this way. What moved me a lot too was in this part of the book, Dr. Farmer writes about a debate that was happening among the doctors on the ground in West Africa, where they had a big debate over how to treat the patients. So because like Doctors Without Borders was heavily involved there too, and they were very concerned about their staff getting infected. This was a new virus, nobody really knew anything about it, and there was a lot of concern that if they used intravenous methods to rehydrate patients, the doctors would be at higher risk of getting poked and things like that. Because I think the primary way that Ebola kills, to my understanding, is through loss of fluid. Your body is losing so much fluid this way, that way, you can't keep it down, and then your body goes into shock and your organs start to fail. So the primary cure is to rehydrate. But what they did in West Africa at the start was to only have oral rehydration, which if you are vomiting constantly, it's just not going to work, right? You're trying to tell these people who are totally weakened they should keep drinking like Pedialyte, chug. So a lot of people died as a result. And the doctors over time started to have a debate about whether this was the best kind of care they could offer to these people. And it became a huge point of tension. And eventually a group of veteran doctors in Doctors Without Borders actually wrote an open letter to their colleagues saying, look, we are not doing our best for the people here. It will not put us at that great a risk if we start to rehydrate using IVs. We are not living up to the mission of our organization. And I was just blown away. These doctors are already risking their lives to volunteer, and that they've held themselves to this higher standard, and that it was an open letter. They're publishing it in that epidemic saying, wow, we could do better than this. We are not actually doing our best to save lives. I think when I read it at the time, the climate here in the US there was so much deception going on that to see these people step up and be so open about the mistakes they had made and to call upon themselves and their colleagues to rise up to the challenge to save complete strangers, just was amazing to me. And again, the point that hit home for me was that it's love, compassion, wisdom, integrity. All these good qualities are what will help us to save each other in this world. So maybe it's a stretch, but on that note, I wanted to say too that as we embark on building a Buddha Hall here, at least that's what we're hoping will come to pass, it's not just about the money, or the expertise. It looks right now that we have a good expert team that's helping us. I mean, the contractor, all these different experts in different areas have been making plans with us, and we're trying our best to start inviting generosity. But I really think that it's the love, compassion, wisdom, and community that will help us to get this building built. So on that note, that's why we're having a Shakyamuni Buddha Practice Day tomorrow. For all of you who want to participate, to just show up and do the Buddha practice, the Shakyamuni Buddha practice, to cultivate your good qualities and contribute that to helping us build the Buddha Hall. Because it's not for 16 people to use, it's for the whole world to continue to cultivate good qualities, to enjoy, to delight, to practice all these wonderful teachings on love, compassion, wisdom, and community, which are what will change the world. So maybe it's a stretch, but see if that works for you, that coming together and saying mantra will help us to build the Buddha Hall. Look on our website and you'll find more information about the event. Right, so just to add, the Shakyamuni Buddha practice date is on April the 3rd, but we will have another one in May, so keep checking our calendar.